Hello, my name is Clarissa Walker, and I'm the writing instructor for Writing 302. This screencast is to talk you through the bundle number one. Bundle number one exercise is our current activity for the course. That deadline is October 23rd. The deadline for the bundle exercise is October 23rd. There are no forum discussions for the weeks that we work on the bundle, so that would be this week and next week. The details of this is in the syllabus. There's a general description of the bundle projects, and then within the schedule of the syllabus, there are specifics on each of the projects. So let's begin. This particular bundle focuses on the epistolary tradition, both historically and how we have changed it, adapted, used it, killed it in modern times for its effects and influence on our writing culture or a writing culture. We're examining it, we're holding it up to the light, asking questions and offering commentary on its role on writing culture currently, the epistolary tradition. What is an epistolary tradition? An epistolary tradition is essentially letter writing. It's a genre that is letter writing in the sense that it also includes, it's written communication that includes notes, postcards, and telegrams, and it talks about composition that possesses the characteristics of letterness. So we are talking about an epistolary tradition in the many iterations that have surfaced in our time and, of course, historically. So as you can see in the syllabus, this project is broken up into three parts. The first part is the research portion. The research portion is described as in this way in the syllabus. Basically, you are collecting 5 artifacts, whether it's documentaries, whether it's films, feature films, whether it's short articles, whether it's book chapters, or one archival letter or one handwritten letter is a requirement. We'll talk about that in a moment. And it's basically, this is the part 1 section. It is a research requirement for you. We're going to talk about that right now. What are we after as we do this research? What are we trying to learn? The questions that each artifact that you select, when you curate artifacts for this project, your curation project should be guided by these 3 questions. What are some of the distinguishing characteristics of the epistolary traditions? How has this genre shifted over time? And does this tradition participate in modern writing culture, or is it in fact a dead tradition? So basically, we're after our own personal criteria for an epistolary tradition. If you were to offer a profile for yourself or a checklist of some of the possible characteristics that you get out of the research, we are compiling such a list. And then you want to see how that list changed over time, and are there variations? So that is what the beginning piece of the bundle is about. It's about answering those questions, kind of learning what we mean when we say a thing is a part of an epistolary tradition. This is a quick note to add to what's already in the syllabus. You are responsible for 5 to 10 artifacts. That is just a minimum of 5, obviously. I have provided you with 4 possibilities, but they're just possibilities. On the website, on the course website, in the description, there are 4 possibilities. You can choose up to 2 of those, or you can reject them all completely and choose your own. The last thing is, one of the 5 that you choose has to be a handwritten letter. Obviously, if we're talking about letter writing, you have to deal with a letter. So you apply those same questions, your criteria, to a letter of your choice. So there are so many options for this. You can choose a letter that you already have. Some people have used a letter that was written during the war from grandma to grandpa from within their own family, personal letters. It has to be a letter, not an email. Or letters that you find in research. If you just search, if you do a Google search on famous handwritten letters, you'd be surprised at what you find. But we have to handle a letter applying or employing this criteria or these characteristics that we've isolated. So there are a total of 5 artifacts, up to 10, 2 of which you may get from the sources that I've provided, but there's just optional up to 2 of them. And then 1 must be a handwritten letter. And all of these are intended to get at a criteria or characteristics of the epistolary tradition. Possible artifacts: you can use TED Talks, you can use YouTube videos, you can use scholarly articles, of course, the letter, news articles, documentaries, and films. A film, for example, that if a letter carries a portion of the narrative or narration or the storyline, it's eligible because we're getting at the characteristics or qualities of this tradition. Now, I want to share with you a few of the qualities that I have wanted to isolate to give you examples of what I mean by creating a checklist. So one way to do that is to talk about the terminology or characteristics, and this is one of the sources that I've obviously offered you on the website. So the letterness of an artifact it determines its participation in this tradition. So its adaptability, basically, how it can morph into other forms. Another one is epistolary intent, the fact that it is made to communicate specifically to another person or persons, in that the greeting is actually addressing someone else, and we're examining what does that do to the delivery. What is its significance when we participate in this tradition? How does it shape or change, if you're someone who's familiar with the rhetorical situation, with the elements of the rhetorical situation, for example? Extends time and space. So we come from, many of us, a time that amplifies the use of digital tools such as email, etc. So when we come from the original, when we discover and rediscover the original uses of letters, and that it extended time and space. It extended time and space. Sometimes if you'll read that there wasn't even an address, or it's just so approximate. There were only approximations. And you certainly, if you were writing during World War II, you had no idea. It could be months later before they would get your letter, but it was written with that understanding. So expected response. What does it do to the crafting of an artifact when you expect a response? Where's the evidence of that? So we're isolating evidence. How is the epistolary tradition unique from all other, and what does it bring to an artifact's ability to be effective in its purpose? Here's an awesome quote from one of the people, Sarah Pausty. She says, "The content of letters is influenced not only by the personal relationships between letter writers and letter readers and socio-historic context that they lived within, but also their position within their epistolary networks." It's talking about how we are talking about an entire ecology that reacts to one thing reacts to another. Like the context of war has everything to do with everything that's available in the way of correspondence, or what's going to end up in that letter, and what's going to be included as news or as an update. The tone, the stance, of course, and we have some examples of like Paul's epistles to the Romans, for example. Several of Paul's epistles in the Bible, in the New Testament, which are letters, were addressed to many people. And at that time, the epistolary networks referred to there, they would have been letters written to be read aloud. But for example, those World War II letters, those love letters, those were written in a very specific time where the letter writer maybe thought that they weren't going to survive. And it was very personal, say to a wife or to a loved one. So it's really important to be able to identify and isolate the characteristics that say this is how a letter is different from, say, an essay or a blog. And these are the ways that we can show and measure that criteria. Just to quickly remind you, we're distinguishing specific characteristics. We want to see shifts over time in this tradition, and we want to talk about the modern iterations of the epistolary tradition. And many argue that it is a dead tradition, and we want to see if we agree with that, and if we do, why. As you know, because it was listed in the syllabus from week 1, we are reading together Between the World and Me. It's by Ta-Nehisi Coates. A couple of things about this particular book. It's really exciting that we get to read this together. It was a National Book Award winner in 2015. Many of you have probably heard of it before. The Pulitzer finalist for general nonfiction that same year. It's about 176 pages. It's a very thin book, and the reason why are we reading it? Well, we're reading it because it was developed from a letter to my son, which Ta-Nehisi, who is a regular writer for The Atlantic, published this letter to his teenage son, and it became a book that was very, very celebrated. So we're looking at a book that was born from a letter during our bundle about the epistolary tradition, and that is why it's relevant, very, very relevant to what we're doing. But now we're going to talk about, in this next screencast, which I did it separately on purpose, talking about what are you actually doing? What are you putting together? What is a bundle? And how do I put together an atavist? Great question. So listen to the next screencast. It answers all of those questions. And please go through the syllabus, and the syllabus answers questions as well.